I subscribed to Cory McCarthy years ago because, like him, I'm also a vegan bodybuilder, or weight trainer, or whatever you want to call the hobby. It's a very small demographic, so I was always interested in what others were doing. But there comes a time when you realize disappointment and your paths in life diverge. Vegan Cheetah was another YouTuber I discovered around the same time and came to realize that he was a junkie and was not even vegan. My first exposure to Cory McCarthy was when he made a video response to Vegan Gains, the most popular vegan bodybuilder on YouTube. Like me, Vegan Gains is a high-carb vegan. Cory McCarthy is a high-fat, low-carb vegan. He basically follows a version of the Atkins diet, so he lost me there, and I kind of didn't pay as much attention. I thought that Atkins had been debunked for years. But this video is not about vegan nutrition. This is about rational ethics, and what McCarthy says in this video is highly irrational. I knew of his natalist views for years as his spouse, Tara McCarthy, who's another vegan, made a video talking about their plans to have children together. This video, I believe, has since been deleted, as many of Tara McCarthy's videos have been over the years. She also changed her philosophy and channel name several times. I first heard about her when the channel name was Think Vegan, and she even expressed an understanding of anti-natalism. Whether this changed because she got swept into Cory McCarthy's pro-natalist views, we'll probably never know.
For all the joys associated with fatherhood, and not to mention genetically contributing to the continuation of your people, there also comes a downside of sorts.
Okay, so in the beginning, McCarthy makes two claims. Fatherhood, and let's just call this what it really is, a human breeding experiment, is good because, one, it brings the one who starts the experiment, quote-unquote, joy, and two, it contributes to the genetic future of the breeder's, quote-unquote, people. So joy is not a useful word to a philosopher, especially a negative utilitarian. Happiness is another one that classical utilitarians would use. And then there is well-being or thriving, Sam Harris's favorite word. But these words are like love. There is no scientific definition, and what is one person's joy could be another person's nightmare. I'm sure the so-called joys of human breeding would be completely lost on me. I never thought that this activity would bring me anything but misery. And this brings me to the second point of the statement. It does not matter how many joy moments you get from procreation. We must always think about the victim first. This is the same logic we use as ethical vegans. It does not matter how much pleasure or joy we get from torturing an animal. The animal's suffering is what we must be concerned with first. I think as a vegan, McCarthy can understand that. Both McCarthys have stated in the past that they dislike being labeled as racists. Racism is bigotry for one's own genetic heritage, or people who just share the same skin color as you. But it is hard to see how that label does not apply here to his second claim. I personally feel zero attachment or high regard for my fellows with similar skin color or heritage. I have reddish hair, blue eyes, and pale skin, so obviously my recent ancestors came from Northern Europe. My name also has a Mick in it, so McCarthy and I might even share distant relatives. But I really couldn't care less, except as a curiosity. It matters to me as much as being associated with everyone who is 5'8", or people who have birthmarks under their left pectorals. The path my DNA took doesn't have a logical consequence to my philosophy. My people are not white-skinned people, Irish people, or even male people. My people are vegans, anti-natalists, negative utilitarians, and atheists. Those who share my philosophy are my brothers and sisters, not the ones who share my DNA. For example, my brother could not have been a more different person than me. He was the most selfish, self-absorbed, and reckless person I knew. My brother sadly committed procreation before he died. Now, I could bemoan the fact that the shittier sibling is the one whose genes will now live on and mine will not, but it doesn't really matter. His daughter could grow up to be a child-free anti-natalist, and I could have had a kid who grew up to be a Mormon with 10 kids. The DNA does not decide who is a quality human being. It's up to that individual to decide who they want to be. Geography and genetics are not what makes a rational human being. My neighbors are football-watching, hunting and fishing, meat-eating, God-believing breeders. We share cultural manners like we wave to each other, we're polite, friendly, and tend to leave each other alone, and these are all qualities that I like. However, in every other way that matters, our beliefs and the way we live our lives is completely different. One of my neighbors has Hispanic heritage, while the other four are white European like me. But I think of all of them as ATV driving rednecks. Their ethnicity has little to do with who they are. My Hispanic neighbor's house doesn't have piñatas or sombreros on the walls. He's a regular, middle-class, blue-collar American, just like my other neighbors. So as far as ethnic purity goes, I don't give a shit. It doesn't matter. So right off the bat, he gets into race with a Pew Research graph. He doesn't even consider the more topical measurement by country or by culture, rather than by ethnicity. The more educated and civilized countries have the least amount of children just because they are more educated. The ignorant poor have the most kids. I just don't understand the value of this graph. I really couldn't care about French culture, South African culture, or Scandinavian culture where other white people live. They're white, but not American, so it doesn't really affect me. They can't vote here, they aren't my neighbors. The fact is that all of these countries have a higher standard of living and more education, so of course they're going to have fewer kids. That's what educated people do. Hispanics mostly live in South America, which is composed of third world countries, rampant religion, and lack of education. Rather than being anti-Hispanic, it makes more sense to be anti-poverty, anti-religion, and pro-education, especially of women. So in other words, there is no reason to be a racist or ethnic nationalist or whatever they want to call it. It is more rational to point out that one culture is more valuable to the planet and the beings that live on it than another. He then talks about abortion statistics, essentially worrying the viewer of what could happen if blacks and Hispanics did not have so many abortions. Why, they'd be everywhere! Obviously, it is a view of this channel that abortion is good and every pregnancy should be aborted. So there's more discussion about the lower birth rates of whites and Japanese, and he makes this radical proclamation.
The point is, some groups of people enjoy a population boom, while others experience declining birth rates, so you cannot overgeneralize. Ethnic Europeans and Japanese, for example, need to have more babies.
This is a very strong statement. Again, McCarthy is not concerned about the victims here. He's more concerned about a race as a whole, putting it before the individual. You could say that this is another selfish argument, as I assume that a larger population of Europeans and Japanese would give him personal pleasure, and therefore the new people are simply a statistic to him. Of course, rationally, we can look at this statement and say, why need? Why do we need to produce more people on this planet? Why do we need to produce more need? So if Japan is the first nation, nationality, whatever, to die out, so what? How is this a bad thing? Why do we need Japanese or Europeans? Why do we need any sentient life to be crawling all over this planet? He does not say. We should promote logical and developed culture over irrational and underdeveloped culture, Islam. But you can have white Muslims and black atheists. Geographic origins just don't matter.
Keep in mind, your heritage, even down to the things your ancestors did or didn't do, that is all etched into your DNA. Don't let that go extinct. Perhaps one of your ancestors was a fierce Celtic warrior, or an intrepid Viking seafarer, or an honored Japanese samurai. That person, including his actions and achievements, lives on in your blood today. So yes, ethno-nationalism and ancestral pride have scientific merit. Even if you have no control over what group of people or land that you were born into.
This doesn't make much sense to me. My parents were not atheists, anti-natalists, or vegans. So far as I know, none of my ancestors were these things. If I had a child, my vegan ethics would not be etched into his or her DNA. They would just be a genetic copy ready to be molded by their environment. So what McCarthy is referring to here is epigenetics, the theory that changes to an individual can be written to our DNA and transferred to our replicants, or our children. I am no expert in genetics. Reading The Selfish Gene is about as far as I've gotten, but I have a basic understanding from that book about how it works. The following is a quote from Richard Dawkins' website and was written by evolutionary biologist Jerry Coyne.
Only unmethylated bases are stably inherited, and evolution demands stable inheritance. There must be something about the DNA sequence that controls its own methylation. Note that some methylations can last for several generations, though it's not common. For a population to change over time and acquire adaptations, or features that evolve through non-adaptive processes like genetic drift, whatever types of replicators that are inherited must remain unchanged, with of course the exception of mutations in the DNA code. But if the DNA code changed unpredictably back and forth each generation, natural selection evolution wouldn't work. Second, there are also epigenetic changes that are induced not by the DNA sequence but by the environment. Temperature, starvation, and other environmental factors can cause methylation of the DNA as well. The thing is, though, that such changes, because they're rarely passed on to future generations, cannot serve as the basis of evolutionary change. Such changes constitute true Lamarckian inheritance, i.e. the inheritance of acquired characteristics. And lots of studies show us that Lamarckian inheritance doesn't operate. Changes that are induced by the environment, the organism's striving, can't somehow get incorporated into the DNA. An athlete, for example, doesn't produce kids with bigger muscles, and after millennia of circumcision, Jewish boys are still obstinately born with foreskins.
So to me, this seems to blow away his theory that life experiences are inherited in our genes. This isn't the world of Dune by Frank Herbert, where your ancestors' memories are hidden in your subconscious mind somewhere. No, it is simply a fact that when you die, all of your experiences in life die with you. Unless you write them down, no one will ever know what you were like or what you did. At best, epigenetic inheritance is not very well understood at this time. We know that it has a very minuscule influence, if any, and when it does, it's usually negative. For instance, getting exposed to radiation that damages your DNA. That damage can be inherited, but because I lift weights, it does not mean that my progeny will be genetically predisposed to have big muscles. That's not how it works. McCarthy mistakenly thinks that humans, and specifically certain human minorities, are doing something more important than bacteria, when all we are doing is consuming so that we can replicate our genes. Replication for the sake of replication. There is no reason and no goal. It's a dumb process. As epigenetics has been debunked earlier as an illogical, flat earth kind of argument, there is no scientific basis for race pride or ethno-nationalism. This is a pure political ideology like fascism. It is not scientific. We should care about what a person values, not what their ancestors did. I really don't care where my neighbors came from. All I care about is what they think and how they act. Cory then asks that SJWs, which is meant to be a derogatory term for what we used to call bleeding heart liberals, that they don't reproduce, because philosophy is inherited, except that it isn't. McCarthy will not share whether or not he has reproduced, but it would be funny if his kid became a dreaded SJW, which means social justice warrior. I don't really like the term. I don't think there's anything bad with social justice. He and I are both vegans, which means we want justice for animals, so I think it's a shit term. I wish people would stop using it. He seems to think having a liberal child will be impossible because his child will inherit his conservative point of view. It would also be hilarious if he had a daughter who married and had children with a black Muslim. And what would happen to his precious white genetics and the precious memories and inherited actions of his long-dead ancestors? Procreation is always a serious risk. You never know what you're going to get. Our ancestors were too preoccupied with survival to give a shit about what we're doing, and even if they really wanted their genes to live on forever, it doesn't matter because they're dead. We should be concerned with the people who will live in the future, not the corpses who used to be people thousands of years ago. They're fertilizer. Also, McCarthy is for some reason cherry-picking the cool white ancestors he would like to honor by shooting his load inside a woman's vagina. The further back you go, the less white your ancestors will become. Go back 40,000 years and they'll be dark-skinned. Go back a little further and he's talking about replicating the achievements of Homo erectus. This theory falls apart quickly. He then talks about the actual subject of his video, which is lower testosterone levels in breeders. This is the so-called price of fatherhood. I really couldn't care less about this topic. I would like it if breeder testosterone went to zero because I don't want them to continue breeding, but it seems to me that the drop is insignificant as most breeders commit the crime of procreation multiple times without a problem. Then again, any argument I can use to convince people not to breed is worth something, so I have to thank Cory McCarthy for reminding me and his viewers of yet another selfish reason to remain child-free. But this is of course a very minor reason not to have kids. Of all the possible negatives, that this is the one that McCarthy latches onto shows the depth of his pro-life delusion. If one wants to be a world-class bodybuilder, or world-class anything, then having kids is not for you. It's a massive waste of time, money, and resources. Good luck training or living the life you want to live when you have a liability of that significance. The data tells us that parents die younger and have a lower quality of life. But this channel is not interested in the many, many selfish reasons not to procreate. I am concerned with the many objectively bad reasons, like these. What gives you the right to inflict these miseries on someone else? Your genes aren't good enough to replicate because you cannot guarantee that your progeny will be safe from any one of these misfortunes. So I did post a knee-jerk response in the comment section of his video, and Cory McCarthy did respond, which was nice of him. Somehow, this video received only 19 thumbs down and 106 thumbs up. That's very worrying. So I said,
Only fucktards have kids. Cory suffers from Pollyannaism, the delusion that life is better than it really is. A breeder enters their child in a lottery with 1 out of 3 odds of getting cancer. It's reckless and unethical.
And then I posted a link to the odds of dying of cancer. So he responded,
As a former sufferer of depression who went through shit in childhood that nightmares are made of, to the point of being suicidal at one time, I certainly do not see life through rose-colored glasses. I see life for what it is. As good as you make it, allow it to be, but not perfect. There are some things you have no control over, or very little control over, but you can try to make the most of your life. Personally, my life has been made better by little things like lifting, martial arts, studying sciences, exercise, nutrition, astronomy, playing, listening to, studying music, writing, and watching films. It is also enhanced by good company. I don't personally think life is so outrageously bad that I wish I wasn't born, or that we'd all just disappear. At least not anymore. However, I have made an active effort to improve my life and defeat depression. I refused to be a victim and instead took control.
This makes his desire to replicate even more illogical. If he went through suicidal depression, why would he want to inflict it upon someone else? It doesn't matter how rich or poor one is, or where and when they grew up. The unfair and brutal reality of nature will affect the mind of any person smart enough to thoroughly look at it. I too believe in self-improvement, but that has nothing to do with forcing someone else to play the lottery. Besides depression, he didn't even comment on my link from cancer.org about the real risks you're taking when you play God and create life. Is a 1 in 3 risk acceptable? It certainly is not to me. No, the negatives clearly outweigh any positives. Like passing on a stupid family name or stupid family genes for skin pigmentation. McCarthy cannot even guarantee that his children will be vegan, and that alone is reason enough. The real cost of fatherhood is suffering and death. Not for you, but for a new victim and his future victims, and his victims, future victims, and so on. You can choose to do the responsible thing and stop making victims. It's not rational, it's harmful, it's stupid. Please, just say no to kids.